Imagine seeing a notification light up your partner's phone. Not a text from another woman, not a hidden credit card bill. It's a Zillow alert for a one-bedroom apartment. Everyone praises Gen X for being the resilient, independent generation that quietly survives everything. But what nobody tells you is that their obsession with just handling it has turned into a massive, hidden crisis. Right now, a huge percentage of Gen X is committing emotional abandonment, functioning perfectly as household co-managers while starving their marriage to death in silence. They call it survival. The math calls it a guaranteed divorce that destroys 2 retirements at once. Let me show you the trap. Karen finds the apartment listing on Mark's phone. Thursday morning, he's in the shower. His phone buzzes on the nightstand, and she glances at it out of habit. Zillow, studio apartment, $1,240 monthly, near work, quiet building, available March 1st. She stares at it. Mark hasn't said anything, not one word. There's been no conversation about separating, no ultimatum, no dramatic fight, just a Zillow notification for a studio apartment on his phone. She sets the phone face down, sits on the edge of the bed, listening to the shower run. They've been married 22 years. 2 kids, both in college. He's 51, she's 49. They've survived everything together. The 2008 crash that wiped out their savings, the layoff that lasted 8 months, the years they ate pasta 4 nights a week because that's what the budget allowed. They survived all of it because that's what you do. You survive. You keep going. You don't talk about the pain. You just push through it. You figure it out. You handle it. That's what their generation does. And apparently, surviving 22 years together wasn't enough for Mark to want to stay. The shower turns off. She's sitting there when he walks out. She holds up his phone, the Zillow listing still visible. He doesn't say anything for a long time. Then, I was going to tell you. When? Silence. I'm Peter, and if you think surviving hard times together makes a marriage stronger, you need to hear what actually happens inside Gen X relationships built entirely on survival mode. Because there's a silent epidemic destroying marriages that look perfectly fine from the outside. And by the time you see the Zillow listing, the decision is already made. Mark sits down, still in his towel, looking at the floor. Karen asks the question she doesn't want the answer to. How long have you been thinking about this? A while. A while like months, or a while like years? He takes a breath. Maybe 3 years? 3 years. He's been mentally leaving for 3 years, while they paid the mortgage together, while they went to parent-teacher conferences, while they sat across from each other at dinner every night. 3 years of internal departure, while externally maintaining the marriage. Karen says, "Why didn't you say something?" Mark, what was I going to say? The kids were in high school. We had the mortgage. We had everything tied together. There was never a good time. So you just waited? I kept thinking it would get better, or that I'd feel differently, or that we'd figure it out. Karen is doing the math in her head. 3 years ago, their youngest was 15. Mark was waiting for the kids to leave for college. He was running out the clock. Surviving the remaining years of a marriage he'd already decided to leave, waiting for the moment escape became logistically possible. And Karen realizes, she thought they were building something. He was timing his exit. She asks, "Are you unhappy?" Mark, I don't know if unhappy is the right word. I've felt alone for a long time. Alone? You felt alone while living with me? We don't talk, Karen. We manage, we handle things, we solve problems, but we don't actually talk. We haven't in years, maybe ever. And that lands like a physical blow, because she knows he's right. They've spent 22 years solving problems together. Financial problems, parenting problems, logistical problems. They're an excellent team. They function, they survive. But when was the last time they sat down and talked about something that wasn't a problem to solve? She can't remember. Karen calls her friend Diane. They went to college together, both Gen X, both now in their late 40s. Karen tells her about Mark, about the Zillow listing, about the 3 years. Diane is quiet for a moment. Then, James moved out 6 months ago. Karen didn't know. Nobody knew. Diane and James had been married 19 years. From the outside, they looked exactly like Karen and Mark.
stable, functional, survivors. Diane says, "We called it a conscious uncoupling, but really we just ran out of reasons to keep maintaining something that had stopped being a marriage a decade ago and started being a household management partnership." Karen asks her other close friend. Different story, same ending. Separated, quietly, after decades of marriage. She starts looking at the data, and what she finds explains everything. Researchers call it gray divorce or silver splitting. Divorces among couples over 50 have doubled since 1990. Among Gen X couples in particular, the rate is accelerating. And the reason isn't infidelity, isn't financial failure, isn't dramatic breakdown. The reason is what therapists call emotional starvation in functional marriages. The marriage works on paper. Bills get paid, kids get raised, logistics get managed. But somewhere in the process of surviving the 2008 crash, the career setbacks, the tight budgets, the parenting pressures, emotional connection got deprioritized, then deferred, then forgotten. And Gen X is uniquely vulnerable to this pattern. They're the generation that learned to handle things. Their parents were largely absent emotionally, working, rebuilding, or simply from a generation where feelings weren't discussed. So Gen X learned, don't complain, figure it out, survive. And that survival ethos that helped them through layoffs and financial crises and parenting challenges, it's poison in marriages. Because surviving together isn't the same as living together. Functioning together isn't the same as connecting together. Mark and Karen survived everything. They just forgot to maintain the actual relationship while they were doing it. Let's talk about what silent divorce actually costs. Because this isn't just emotional devastation, it's financial catastrophe for the generation least prepared to absorb it. Mark is 51. Karen is 49. They have home equity, $187,000 after 22 years of payments, retirement savings, $312,000 combined, other assets, $28,000. Total, $527,000. Divorce at this age means splitting everything. Mark's share, $263,500. Karen's share, $263,500. But here's what that actually means for each of them. Mark rents the studio apartment at $1,240 monthly. That's $14,880 annually. At 51, with $263,500 in assets, he's 14 years from a retirement where he needs probably $850,000 to maintain middle-class living standards through age 85. He currently has $156,000 in his half of the retirement accounts. He needs to save $694,000 more in 14 years. That requires saving $38,000 annually. His take-home on his $72,000 salary is $54,000. After rent and basic living expenses, $19,200 available to save. He's $19,000 annually short of what he needs. He will retire poor, not struggling, poor, working until 67 or 68 minimum, possibly 70. Karen is in the same position, $107,000 in her half of retirement accounts. She's been working part-time for years to be present for the kids. Her income, $38,000. Now she needs to save $743,000 over 16 years on a salary where she takes home $29,000 annually. After rent for a one-bedroom apartment, $1,400 monthly in their market, she has $12,200 annually for everything else. Savings? Zero. She won't be able to save anything. Karen will work until she physically can't. And then what? She'll be dependent on Social Security of roughly $1,100 monthly. She'll need to move somewhere cheap. She'll need help from her kids who are starting their own lives and shouldn't have to support a parent who made $312,000 in combined retirement savings and walked away with $107,000 at 49. Together, they had a functional shot at comfortable retirement. Split apart, they both face elderly poverty. And the brutal irony? They sacrificed emotional connection for 22 years in service of financial stability. And the moment that emotional neglect finally collapsed the marriage, the financial stability collapsed with it. They survived everything to arrive at a catastrophe they created themselves, slowly, quietly, over decades of choosing function over connection. Here's what's going to start a war in the comments. Maybe Mark isn't wrong. Maybe spending another 20-30 years in a marriage where you feel fundamentally alone, where you function as business partners rather than spouses, is its own kind of poverty, emotional poverty. And no retirement account balance makes that bearable. Some people will say, work on the marriage, get therapy. You don't throw away 22 years. Others will say, 22 years of feeling alone is too long. At 51, he has maybe 30 good years left. Why should he spend them in a relationship that stopped nourishing him a decade ago? Both are right, both are wrong. That's the trap. Because the argument about whether to leave misses the actual question. How did a couple who genuinely loved each other spend 22 years together and arrive at a place where one of them has felt alone for 3 years without saying anything? The answer is the Gen X survival lie. The belief that handling things is loving someone, that paying the bills together is connection, that raising good kids together is intimacy, that surviving hardship together creates competent co-managers, not marriage. Gen X was taught to endure, to handle it, to push through, and they pushed through so hard for so long, they pushed right past each other without noticing.
Mark doesn't move into the studio apartment. Not immediately. Karen does something that surprises both of them. She doesn't cry. She doesn't argue. She doesn't call a divorce attorney. She says, before you sign a lease, can we spend 3 months actually trying? Not surviving, not managing, actually trying. Mark, what does that mean? It means we stop talking about logistics. The bills are automated, the kids are in college, there are no problems left to solve. So what do we actually have to say to each other when there's nothing to manage? Mark doesn't know. Neither does she. That's the point. They find a therapist. Not a couples counselor who helps them communicate better about finances and household management. A therapist who asks them questions like, what do you want from your life? Not your marriage, your life. And the answers are uncomfortable because Karen discovers she's been so focused on surviving and maintaining that she doesn't know what she actually wants. She's been serving the marriage, the kids, the budget, and she's lost track of herself somewhere in the 1990s. Mark discovers he's been interpreting Karen's competence as indifference. Her ability to handle things made him feel unnecessary, not unloved, unnecessary. And he couldn't say that because Gen X men don't say things like that. You just feel it quietly for 3 years and search Zillow. 3 months of actually talking, not managing. Talking reveals something. They don't dislike each other. They never did. They just stopped seeing each other somewhere around 2011 when the survival pressure was highest, and they turned toward the crisis and away from each other and never fully turned back. Mark cancels the studio inquiry, not because the marriage is fixed, because he realizes he was going to blow up his financial future and spend his remaining years alone to escape a loneliness that might be fixable. It's not a happy ending, not yet, maybe not ever, but it's an honest one. Here's what the Gen X survival lie actually costs. It doesn't just steal your emotional life, it steals your financial future too. Because the divorce that results from decades of emotional neglect lands at exactly the worst financial moment, late 40s, early 50s, when you're 15 years from retirement with not nearly enough saved to fund 2 separate lives. You can survive a 2008 crash. You can survive a layoff. You can survive tight budgets and difficult years and real hardship. What you cannot survive is decades of being excellent partners in everything except the relationship itself, because that brand of neglect is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't create crisis moments you can solve together. It just slowly empties the marriage of everything that made it a marriage, until one day someone opens Zillow and you find out they've been gone for 3 years. If you're Gen X and you've been in survival mode for most of your marriage, hear this. The crisis is over. The hard years are done. The kids are grown or almost grown. The debts are paid or almost paid. And now you have to answer a question that survival mode let you ignore. Do we still know each other? Do we still like each other?
Do we have anything left to say when there's nothing left to manage? If you don't know the answer, find out now. Not in 3 years when your partner is secretly browsing apartments. Not after the finances are split and both of you are facing retirement poverty on incomes designed to support one household. The math of gray divorce is brutal. 2 people who had a combined shot at financial security, walking away with individual portions that condemn both to working until they die. Don't let the survival lie cost you everything twice. Once in the marriage you stopped tending, and once in the retirement you can no longer afford. Mark and Karen have maybe 30 years left. The question isn't whether they wasted 22, it's whether they're willing to actually show up for what comes next. And that question isn't romantic, it's mathematical, it's financial. It's the difference between 2 people pooling resources and building something toward the end of their lives, or 2 people managing separate poverty on salaries that were only adequate when combined. The Gen X survival lie says, if we made it this far, we must be okay. But okay isn't a marriage. Okay is a holding pattern, and holding patterns, eventually, run out of fuel. Karen is still sitting on that edge of the bed. Mark is still across the room, 30 years ahead of them, going somewhere together or going somewhere apart. The math says together, but math never saved a marriage. Only honesty does.